Okay, hopefully everyone can see my slides.
Looks good.
Okay, great. So I'll go ahead and get started. Just want to say thank you for the invitation to share a new, pretty exciting project with everyone today. The title is Climate Smart Commodities for Idaho, a public-private tribal partnership. And so this was a USDA call that an application went forward through University of Idaho with many partners throughout the state. It is a statewide project, of course, focused on climate smart ag, which is a neat program. It's really taking a systems approach to looking at reducing greenhouse gas emissions, as well as increasing carbon sequestration on working farms. So it is a neat program in that it considers all the way from the field to the supply chain, through the supply chain, and looks for ways to support farmers in making conservation efforts through these partnerships and through market-based programs. Okay, my slides aren't moving forward for some reason. Ah, there we go. So just a little bit about the call. It was released February 7th. This was a brand new project. And so USDA NRCS put out a call for projects that implement climate smart production practices, activities, and systems. There were a few requirements that we had to respond to in the call for proposals. The first one was that we had to include early adopters and underserved growers. Those early adopters, of course, are always people that we keep in mind, because those are people that have been doing the right things for many years, and actually, because they've been doing those things on their farms, are sometimes excluded from other programs. We need to measure, monitor, and quantify the greenhouse gas benefits that are associated with climate smart practices, many of which are some of our best management practices anyways that we talk about when we're talking about soil health. So there's a big overlap in climate smart practices and our existing best management practices. We need to help develop markets and promote resulting climate smart commodities. So as part of our project, we hope at the end to have a few products that are ready to go that can be labeled climate smart. We did apply to the first pool. There were two different pools that you could apply to, and our budget was about 81 million. We were funded for about 55 million. So of course we had to reduce the scope of our original proposal. Okay. Originally, when we thought about going for this call, a few of us got together at the University of Idaho and thought, okay, well, do we want to partner with other states? Like many projects that were funded, there were 70 funded projects across the US. Many of them involved multiple states. We decided to just focus on Idaho because we have so many things that lended themselves to this call. We have an agricultural-based economy, of course, with crops that enter national and international supply chains. We have a mixture of large to very small-scale processors within the state. And many of these processors and companies actually already have their own sustainability programs where they're trying to help their farmers that grow their crops implement climate smart practices. So we were kind of a step ahead in working with our companies within the state. We have a wide range of different kind of geographically distinct regions with different soil types and different climates, which allows us to really test a practice across different landscapes and different environments. And that will help us, I think, apply our results to elsewhere in the United States, or at least in the Western US. We are experiencing threats due to water declines and more variability in our climate. And we know that increasing temperatures could reduce the yield of some of our crops. So we are aware of this within the state and know that it's something that we have to work on. So I'm going to move through these pretty quick to stay on track. You can see the funded partners here. We have the Idaho Association of Conservation Districts, 2 Idaho tribes, the Nature Conservancy, and the Desert Mountain Beef Co-op, so grass-fed co-op. So we include a number of crops: wheat, barley, potato, sugar beet, chickpea, as well as beef. And you can see that we have a long list of supporting partners here. The first ones all wrote letters of support. We had about 60 letters of support go forward with our application, which was really nice. We were able to demonstrate that we already have this network developed that we can take advantage of. And then USDA partners, which had to come on after the fact because they were not allowed to participate in the development of these projects since it was a USDA NRCS funding program. But we have now spoken to all of the USDA partners and they're quite enthusiastic, and we think we'll have a firm partnership there moving forward in the future. So the practices that we want, right now the project is set up so farmers can pick from a suite of these practices that may work better in some parts of our state than others, but you can see the different practices listed here. And these are things that we think our farmers are interested in. Some are already experimenting with. We have some experience in our extension teams working on these practices now. So we already have some history within the state and knowledge to build on. And again, a lot of these climate smart practices are definitely some of the normal kind of best management practices that we would suggest to farmers who are trying to build soil health. So that's a good connection. We did have to run all of these practices through a model to estimate the amount of greenhouse gas reductions that we might gain. And so you can see that number over here on your right-hand side of the slide. So hopefully we will realize that model. Of course, every model has its biases, and we've not used this model extensively in the state of Idaho. So it'll be interesting to see how we meet that goal. This has a lot of text on it. I'm not going to read through everything, but I just wanted to kind of outline what the project kind of looks like and how it's laid out. You can see the state of Idaho and the different conservation districts outlined in different colors. And the way we have this set up is that in each of the districts, we're going to have what we call a benchmark farm, where we're going to have very intense monitoring of greenhouse gases and carbon sequestration on different practices. And then we'll have tier 1 farms, and those tier 1 farms are going to be monitored not quite as intensely as the benchmark farms, but we'll also be taking measurements there. And the tier 2 farms are largely going to be farmer reported. So we'll have an opportunity to actually quantify these greenhouse gas savings across the state, which is going to be good because we'll have more confidence in our models that we use in the future to predict carbon sequestration and greenhouse gas emission reductions. And farmers that want to use that knowledge to market their crops or to participate in the carbon credit trading program, anything along those lines, will have that data, which will allow them to make stronger projects and probably trade projects at a higher price for a better quality project. So we will be monitoring those things. We'll have a host of grad students involved in this, as well as staff members and researchers out at these sites. We have a strong extension team. Let's see, Courtney and Steve, I think, have been part of those conversations and have helped us kind of design this program, because not only do we need to measure this and provide stipends for the farmers that are growing those crops, but we also need to provide technical assistance. So this is going to definitely take a full team to get this project up and going and bring it to a successful conclusion. We do have another part that was required by USDA, and that one again is looking at those supply chains and kind of estimating, if we reduce the greenhouse gas emissions on farm, how does that stack up to the greenhouse gas emissions along the supply chain? And we'll be dealing with things like, those ownerships of greenhouse gas reduction credits or benefits as well. So there's a lot of work involved in this in terms of the contracts with the farmers, as well as looking at those supply chains and understanding the total greenhouse gas reductions when it comes to the end of the line when you're actually selling a project. Another component is working with the consumers so that we can provide products that they're willing to pay for and learn more about what are they willing to pay for in terms of a climate smart granola bar, or a climate smart bag of potatoes, or a climate smart beer, for example. So that'll be interesting research that'll all come together to help us put together this system. I will add that we will be interacting with the whole entire network of these projects across the United States. So I think that is really an amazing opportunity, right, to get Idaho data and Idaho ideas expressed at the national level, and possibly be able to impact policy moving forward when we're talking about greenhouse gas management and carbon. So these are the expected outcomes from the project so far, and I'll just leave you with those, and I'm happy to take any questions people might have.
All right, thanks, Jodi. That's a lot to pack into a short presentation.
Yeah.
Well, and I should
don't know
tell
how
people
long I took, but there it is.
I should have told people before we started that given the complexity of the project and the general interest across the board that's been expressed for this grant opportunity, that I had told you in advance that I didn't expect you to be adherent to the strict 5-minute rule there. So so we have a question in about how does a farmer sign up for the compost program? So I guess that's kind of it speaks to a more general question of are the producers already chosen for this, or can people become a part of it yet?
Absolutely. So we don't have at this point an official start date. USDA has, of course, let everyone know that's going to be funded, but then we're having negotiation meetings on, what elements are we cutting or scaling back on to get to 55 million from an $81 million budget, which is, 55 million is amazing. It's wonderful, but it does hurt to cut $26 million out of a grant. So we're having those meetings with USDA. We do not yet have a start date, but we are preparing. So I'm about to send out an email to all the partners to get them together to talk about the contracts, and our price so far is $60 per acre as an average. So some practices may cost a little bit more, some practices may cost less, and so we're going to try to hit that average of $60 per acre for payments for farmers. And farmers will have a choice of signing up with any of the partners that are on this slide. So it could be their conservation district would be a likely place for them to sign up. If they can sign up with the Nez Perce or the Coeur d'Alene tribe if they're farming on tribal grounds, the Nature Conservancy, or if they're interested especially in the grazing component, they can work with Desert Mountain Beef. So growers will have their choice of who they want to sign up with, but everything should look the same from each of these partners in terms of our ability to supply technical support, as well as the payment and the contract.
Yes, and the communications to the producers on opportunities with this. I assume there's quite a communications campaign.
Yeah, definitely. And we've been invited to things like this, which are very helpful in getting the word out. We've had a lot of email contacts, and that will be coming soon. I'll be doing some of the cereal schools that happen around the state later this winter. So, and our partners too have agreed to help us reach out to their growers. So a lot of the processors like Simplot, for example, has been very gracious in agreeing to help us advertise this among their growers. So lots of good opportunities coming up this winter.
Yeah, and I should add that, so for folks that are on this call, you obviously received some of our information about this event, and we'll be using that same list for getting additional information out, and Courtney's managing that. So also for there's that question about compost. There's 33 NRCS field offices across the state. You can talk with the soil conservationist at any one of those about soil conservation practices. One of those is soil carbon amendment, which we can assist with the provisioning of compost or incorporation of compost for. That's one of our recognized practices called soil carbon amendment. So whether it's part of this opportunity that Jodi's talking about, or just working with your regular NRCS field office, I'm just trying to address this question more completely. Then please feel free to talk to folks at your local NRCS field office. So awesome. Well. Yeah,
I have a question actually, Sean.
Yeah,
Sean. Jodi, thank you for the presentation. So do you know how early adopters will be handled in this process? I know we talked about that, but I don't remember what the final outcome is, and maybe that isn't decided yet. But if you're already practicing no-till, or if you're already doing some cover cropping, cover cropping obviously is a little bit of a different situation, because you can do it one year and not do it the next year. It can be an on or off situation, whereas more permanent practices like converting to no-till. Anyway, how do you anticipate early adopters being included or not included in this program?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the early adopters are going to be very important to us. Personally, having been involved in soil conservation now for many years, it's probably going to take multiple practices to get us where we need to be, quite honestly. And we need to be able to have those sites where people are stacking practices for our modeling exercises. Absolutely. We need to be able to replicate the and know the additional benefit that you get as you continue to put conservation practices on top of each other. So there's definitely the stacking of practices. Of course, there's new acreage if you don't have enrolled acreage in any sort of program now. And then we've also talked about a mentoring type situation. We have, as some of our underserved farmers, the young farmers especially fall in that category. And so we'd like to see some kind of system where somebody that's already experienced this and has been working on conservation for many years can help advise and mentor some of the farmers that are just getting into it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jodi. That's like I said, that was a lot to fit in a short space. I think you did a great job, and we appreciate the questions.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Rob Dungan with ARS. Rob.
Yep.
Can you share there you go.
I am going
like
to.
That's starting to come up here.
Let's see here. I'm just going to leave my video off to save some bandwidth. Let's see if I can get this to work. Okay. So compared to Jodi's presentation, mine's pretty simple. So I assume everyone here is aware that we have a fairly large dairy presence in Idaho, and we are the third largest dairy state in terms of milk production. In the Magic Valley, we have roughly 70% of the dairy herd, or nearly 400,000 lactating cattle, and each cow produces nearly 100 pounds of manure per day. So you can do the math. That's 400 million pounds of manure a day that has to go somewhere. And so the image here that I'm showing is a picture we took well over a decade ago, somewhere in Cassia County, of a dairyman applying manure. Now this it's pretty extreme because this dairyman in particular is loading on manure at a really high rate. And I'm going to guess it's somewhere around 200 tons per acre. This is not normal, but dairy manure application rates can be quite high. So I did promise Neil that I would talk about a soil health paper that I just recently published, but I'm pulling the bait and switch here, and I'm going to talk about something a little bit different, but they are closely aligned, and I'd be happy to give a presentation about the paper that Neil contacted me about next time. So there are potential benefits. So while this may be an extreme manure application rate, there could be large benefits, long-term benefits of applying, say, a one-time heavy manure application, because there are these legacy effects that continue for many, many years, and I'll show you in the upcoming slides here. So I'm going to talk about, in the next 4 slides, an old GraceNet project. I call it old because we have a new GraceNet project, and GraceNet is an ARS initiative for greenhouse gas. It's actually an acronym for Greenhouse Gas Reduction through Agricultural Carbon Enhancement Network. And in this project we started in 2004, we applied manure at 2 different rates ultimately. So we had a fertilizer treatment. We had M1 here, which ultimately we applied a total of 60 dry tons of manure per acre, but we applied it over 3 different years. And then M2, we applied manure 6 different times from 2004 to 2009, and the total amount of manure applied was 106 tons per acre. Now, just keep in mind, this is dry tons, and when you're applying manure, it's usually wet and it's about 50% moisture, so you're applying double that amount. So what I'm showing here is the pre-plant available nitrogen in 2014 and 2016 in the top 2 feet of soil. So this is KCl, extractable nitrate, and ammonium. And so on the left, I said it's 2014. Here are the treatments at the bottom: fertilizer, manure 1, manure 2. So these are pre-plant samples. So this is the amount of, right here where I'm moving my cursor below the magenta box, is the amount of available nitrogen. And what's amazing is that we're roughly around 140 pounds per acre of available nitrogen in the soil before fertilizer is ever applied. This is an amazing phenomena that we see in our soils. Okay, we'll see anywhere from roughly 50 to 100 pounds per acre of nitrogen in the soil in the spring without any fertilizer addition. So that in itself is pretty amazing. So just moving on though to M1 in 2014, we are producing about 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre. And then M2 is producing a heck of a lot more nitrogen, over 500 pounds of nitrogen per acre. So there's a lot of nitrogen in that manure that we're applying, but this is, you're talking about 6 years, 5 to 6 years later. And then if you look at the image on the right here, the figure here, this is 7 and 8 years later. We're still pushing out. In the M1, we're still pushing out about 150 pounds per acre. M2, we're pushing out, well over 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Later on, I made a note down here in 2020, there wasn't much you can see in the fertilizer treatment. There's a 68 pounds, M1, 66 pounds. But in M2, we're still putting out about double the amount of nitrogen. So that's 10 years, 11 years later, we're still pushing out nitrogen in those manure treatments. Here's in 2017, the image on the left is a sugar beet study. This was laid on top of the old GraceNet field project. And you can see for sure that there is an influence of if you look at M1 and M2, you can see the above ground biomass is certainly greater than that in the fertilizer. So, I mean, in the fertilizer treatments, we're applying all the nitrogen that the plant needs, but it's very interesting that in the manure treatments, we always see this. We see, you know, a yield or biomass boost. I don't know why it's doing that, but it usually always does that. And if we're looking at the crop yields, if you look at the figure on the right-hand side here, we're looking at corn silage, barley grain, and corn silage. And still, so we are, how many years out here? We're roughly 10 years out from the last manure application. And we're getting a yield boost in the M1 and M2 treatments, okay? And, you know, 11 years out, so I went out there, sampled to perform some enzyme assays for glucosidase, glucosaminidase, phosphomonoesterase, and sulfatase. So these are basically a proxy for carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur turnover in those soils. And what's amazing is 11 years out in the M1 and M2 treatments, we're still seeing the effect of manure on the enzyme activities in the top 6 inches and in the 6 inches below that. I'll just also mention that we are seeing when we did this in 2020, we did see still saw a significant increase in the ACE protein, denitrification enzyme activity, but we didn't see any increase in for potentially mineralizable nitrogen and ammonia oxidation. So I guess I just say that, and I'm repeating myself, but I think that there are, given fertilizer prices, there could be some benefits to applying a one-time high rate of manure. And then basically, you know, then you have this gift that just keeps on giving. And as far as nutrients for the next, it could be a decade, could be 15 years. Okay, I'm gonna finish here and we can take questions.
That is super interesting stuff, Rob. Yeah, it's such a lasting effect.
Yeah, it doesn't go on forever. I got involved in a study in Texas where they applied really, really high rates of manure, and we went back 30 years after the last manure application, and I didn't see any influence of that on the enzyme activity. But here in our soil so far, we're 10 years out and more, and still seeing that lasting effect. And we started a new project called manure priming, where we put on a high rate, and then we're gonna monitor it for the next decade or so, and see what the effect is. Because we layered this study on top of an old study, it wasn't done as well as it could have been done. So we started a new project.
Sure. Pat Purdy's got a good question here. Is there a leaching risk with this high of manure application?
It's possible, but also keep in mind that a lot of this nitrogen is going to be released in the spring, and then we're irrigating at ET. So you're not going to have much of a leaching problem during the growing season. I think you could have some potential problem like later in the winter where there's a lot more moisture, but you also don't have a big release of nitrogen at that time as well.
Right. So I guess the key there is just really good management, good irrigation water management.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, I'll verbalize another question, Robert. I assume that since the manure is bound with carbon, that probably also significantly reduces the leaching risk versus just going out and putting on a bunch of urea or
yeah,
nitrate or something.
Yeah, because it's highly bound, and yeah, it just keeps releasing year after year.
That's like a bank, right? Releasing slowly over time rather than a all at once type deal.
Right.
And I thought that we have it's quite a resource that we have in South Central Idaho. It's viewed oftentimes as a real problem. The numbers that you cited at the beginning they are huge. They're definitely eye grabbing. Yeah. But it seems like it could wind up being a great benefit, particularly with fertilizer prices.
Right. I mean, we could probably fertilize the whole Magic Valley with all the manure that we have, but the problem is it's heavy and transportation costs are through the roof. So we can find a cost-effective way to extract the nutrients and then deliver those nutrients. But then, of course, you're missing the benefit of applying the organic matter. But yeah, maybe down the road we can come up with some technologies to do that.
It was a great presentation. Really interesting stuff, Rob. Thank you for that.
Okay, you're welcome. Thanks.
Awesome. All right. Well, next up we have Bass Hargrove with the Nature Conservancy. Bass, I'll let you queue up your presentation here and see if we can get your slides rolling. Boom, there they are. Looks good.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean, and thanks everybody for being here today. My name is Bass Hargrove, and I'm a senior policy advisor with the Nature Conservancy in Idaho. And the Nature Conservancy is a private nonprofit organization working here in the Gem State and around the world to solve some of the most pressing conservation challenges. And we do that through collaboration and science-based work. So we've been working in Idaho for more than 50 years. And we've been playing in dirt for soil health for about the last 5 years. So we're learning a lot there. And I'm going to talk today about soil health opportunities in the Inflation Reduction Act. And just to clarify, this is separate from the funding that the climate smart commodities funding that Jodi talked about. So this is maybe another option for producers to consider in addition to the U of I project work. So, and this relates to the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a $740 billion budget reconciliation bill signed into law in August. And it represented an unprecedented investment in climate. In fact, about $370 billion over the next 10 years. And 20 billion of that was set aside for agricultural conservation programs. And if all these things come to fruition, could result in about a 40% reduction in the US greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. So how does that 20 billion for agriculture break down? So that is for climate smart agricultural practices that directly improve soil carbon, reduce nitrogen losses and other greenhouse gas emissions, and that capture and sequester greenhouse gases associated with agricultural production. So the biggest chunk of that goes for existing farm bill programs that are kind of farmer facing, EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, and the Conservation Stewardship Program. And this is all new money for FY23, the current fiscal year through 2026. So there are some climate-focused sidebars, and this funding is for a subset of conservation purposes that are authorized by those 4 conservation programs. So just to give a little bit of context, the baseline funding for those 4 programs over the next 4 years is about 15 billion. So the Inflation Reduction Act funding more than doubles that baseline. There's also about $1 billion for conservation technical assistance, and 300 million for USDA to stand up greenhouse gas inventory and assessment program. So this table breaks down the program funding by year, and I would highlight EQIP and the Conservation Stewardship Program as places where there's a good opportunity to fund soil health going forward. And these are programs that help farmers implement conservation practices where the funding goes directly to farmers. Regional Conservation Partnership Program is also an area where partners could get together to develop landscape scale projects that improve soil health. And there's a lot of funding in that as well. So the Inflation Reduction Act funding, this is really important, is backloaded. So if you look at the 2023 funding, it's about tenfold less than the 2026 funding. So it goes up really fast and really starting in FY 2024. So if you look at EQIP in FY 23, it's 250 million. In FY 24, 1.75 billion, and then rising all the way to 3.5 billion in 2026, which is about a 14-fold increase. So we don't know exactly how this is going to play out yet, because the National Office of NRCS has not yet issued guidance on how it will play out. So we don't really know, but we can guess that regenerative agriculture and soil health practices will really fare well. So these are some of the practices that USDA currently identifies as climate smart mitigation activities under EQIP and CSP. So cover crops, no-till and low-till, conservation cover, conservation crop rotations, a bunch of different buffers, barriers, and borders practices, and mulching, among other things. And there's also grazing, livestock, forestry under those practices as well. So as I mentioned above, we don't know quite yet what the requirements will be for the Inflation Reduction Act funds, but the clock is ticking, especially to get the FY 23 funds out the door. So hopefully we'll know more shortly after the new year. And so I guess bottom line, the message is get ready. There's about to be another big infusion of funding for regenerative agriculture practices that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So if you or your friends or partners or other producers have been thinking about investing more in soil health, the next few years would be a great time. So I'll stop there.
All right, thanks, Bass. Yeah, had to do a little digging to come up with all of that, huh?
Yeah, and thank you, Sean, for helping me out with some of that.
Yeah, and that the list of climate smart practices is Bass has some of the key ones on there on that slide, and then I think there's a total of 40. But I've had the question like, hey, NRCS has over 100, well over 100 conservation practices, and why aren't X, Y, and Z on that list? And the fine print on those, what I found out was that the ones that made the list, the short list of the 40, they've got there's defensible amounts of carbon, CO2 prevention or mitigation associated with those practices. They've been studied enough to for there to be a kind of a baseline or agreed upon mitigation or prevention effect, reduction effect in greenhouse gas emission or carbon sequestration. So at any rate, that's why the list is constrained. But from our huge list of conservation practices that we offer. So yeah. At any rate, so thought I'd mention that.
Can I ask a quick question? I noticed that that grazing, intensive grazing or cover crop grazing or stacking cattle, livestock on top is not one of the practices. That seems to be a pretty big omission.
Yeah, I believe prescribed grazing is on the climate smart. I think Bass was just showing a very short list of some of the most common practices that people would recognize from that list. But actually, there's 40 on that list, or 40 some on that list that was put out as climate smart ag practices.
Okay,
and we could share that full list too. It's on the NRCS website, and that's my fault, Pat, for not including that. I just did take a subset of the practices that are.
Well, that's okay. Yeah, thank you. So it's just obviously it's a very abbreviated list.
Yep. The one other thing I would add as we think about all this funding coming to Idaho through the Climate Smart Commodities Grant with U of I, which the Conservancy is participating in, One way we might think about that being complementary to the Inflation Reduction Act funding is, it's my understanding that you can't stack the payments from the U of I grant on top of existing contracts for EQIP or CSP. Now, I don't know for sure how all that's going to play out, but that could be complementary. So, you know, if you're already an EQIP or CSP producer, you know, there's going to be more funding to ramp up those practices, and it might complement some of the stuff coming out of the Climate Smart Commodities grant from U of I. So.
Yeah, and how those things play together, it remains to be seen. They'll work out the details as we go.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Real quick that yeah, you would have to stack an additional practice on top of any federal funds to be eligible for our program at U of I, but definitely there's a lot going on the ground, and the more that we can work together to help monitor and quantify the outcomes, the better off we're going to be.
I'll see you when we go.
Excellent. Any other questions for Bass? Well, awesome. Thank you, Bass. Appreciate you being here today.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. And Steve Hines is on deck next. Steve is with the University of Idaho, and I'll let Steve get in there and see if we can line up his slides. Oh, they just showed up. And not in presentation mode, but we can see them clearly. Oh, there we go. All right, looking good, Steve. Take it away.
I think you're still muted, Steve.
I am still not hearing anything from Steve.
All right, how about now?
I hear you now.
All right. Some days are that way, you know.
I know this. Yeah. All right.
Okay, how about now?
There we go. We're in
right.
presentation mode and everything. All right, take it away.
I think I'd never done this before. Well, good morning, everybody. Courtney had asked if I would talk about a project that we've been doing out at the Kimberly Research Farm for three summers now. We finished up this year, and this is just some of my colleagues and I that looked at this project. And what we did, you know, every year we get a lot of calls from people wanting recommendations on cover crop species and things like that. And it's kind of hard to make those recommendations when we haven't grown them or we haven't seen them grown, etc. So I got the idea that what I really wanted to do out at the farm was to take this cover crop periodic table that you're looking at here that I'm sure everybody has seen. This is one that Marlon and some of his colleagues put together primarily for Wyoming, but I thought it would be appropriate for Idaho. And I wanted to lay it all out just like this and grow, you know, kind of grow the periodic table out of the farm, but that got to be a little problematic. So we split it up and grew some of these things for 3 years to take a look at them. What you're looking at here, anything that has the yellow highlight, we did not grow. The camelina, I don't know, we just didn't. The hybrid brassicas, we figured we grew enough brassicas to have a pretty good handle on those. Oilseed radish, we know, has been grown around a lot. The pollinator plants, I mean, you can kind of throw whatever you want to on that. On the clovers, we actually had a hard time finding some of these clovers. And so ended up not growing Ladino or Alsite. We did grow a spring lentil. We didn't grow a winter lentil. woolly pod vetch we could not find for the seed and chickling vetch. What I want to point out, you'll see those species there that have the red box around them. I don't know if you can see my pointer on the screen there. You cannot grow those in southern Idaho because of the dry bean seed rules. All of those, if they're going to be grown in southern Idaho, they have to have the phytosanitary certification that dry bean seed has to go through. So although I say that, I know there are mixes in southern Idaho that have soybeans grown in them because I have seen them myself. But at any rate, this is just kind of, we grew a lot of stuff and it was a lot of fun. So let's talk about that a little bit. So the things that we had successes with, the ryegrasses we know grow really well. The cereals, all the cereals grow well here. That's no big surprise there. We have found that, my opinion is cereal rye is one of the best cereals we have. If you're trying to get quick ground cover, good ground cover, produce a lot of feed. However, I understand that if you are in a cereals situation on your farm that you don't want to grow cereal rye, and we get that. It was interesting when we brought in the seed, we got it from AgriSource over in Burley, and they mixed all of our mixes for us for another project. They would not even open the bag of cereal rye for us at their facility. So they were pretty adamant. They were not going to start spreading cereal rye around the valley. So at any rate, oats, especially we found, especially if you're trying to find something for forage production, the oat or barley varieties that have been developed specifically for grazing, we've had great success with those. The brassicas we know are pretty much, the radish and turnips are pretty standard. Forage collards is one that I just really like, that particular species. It grew fast, it grew well. On the last 2 summers, we would go in and graze those with a forage harvester. And man, those forage collards just kept cranking out, and then they survived. They're a biennial. They survived the winter and kicked right off again early in the spring. And might be one, if you're looking at something to get some winter forage as well as some additional spring grazing before you go into a cash crop. We really like forage collards. African cabbage is just another brassica. Did not grow very well in the fall for us. We did a late fall planting, trying to find something that would grow after silage corn. Still haven't found that silver bullet. We know the vetches grow well, but we have concerns about them becoming weedy. We did grow some teff. Teff grew great. We just have never seen it do well in a cover crop mix. And so the clovers, I have kind of come around that good old red is good old red. It has kind of become my go-to recommendation unless you have something very specific. Yellow sweet clover, one only has to look at every roadside and ditch bank in this country to know that yellow sweet clover grows really well. So we had pretty good success with that. I'll talk more about that in just a minute. Buckwheat grows really good. You just need to have a termination plan for that. Sun hemp is an interesting plant. It will grow here. I haven't quite yet figured out where it's going to fit. And I'll show you a picture and show you why. Chicory, sunflowers, millets. I won't spend a lot of time going through all these. These all just grew really well for us. Those that did not grow, and again, we grew all these on one site, 1 year, and this is one bit of experience. Phacelia, we planted that this year, and it just could not compete with the weeds. I have seen Phacelia do really well on some plots over in Rupert, so I know it grows, but it didn't do well for us this year. We tried sugar beet in a late planting in September, and sugar beets just seem to take forever to get out of the ground. And safflower grows well, but if you're going to play with safflower, and especially if you want something to eat it, I would recommend that you get the baldy variety. Otherwise, if you've not ever played with safflower, it has spikes on it. on the flowers and on the leaves, and it is just kind of a bugger to deal with. Okra, besides being a nasty, slimy little vegetable that my mom made us eat when we were kids, okra grew. It cannot handle the very slightest bit of cold frost, however, it just wipes it out. Don't really know where okra would fit when we have so many other things. And then this year we grew a lot of clovers, and I was really expecting great things for some of these annual clovers, and they just did not impress, including Balanza, which if you read any of the no-till magazine or anything online, I mean, that's supposed to be the wonder clover, but it did not do much for us. And so again, good old red outperformed all of these this year. And again, these were all in single species plus. These were not mixes. So some takeaways. It's just pretty hard to beat a radish, turnip, pea, triticale mix unless you have something very specific that you're going after. Cereal rye is a wonderful grass, but you need to have a termination plan. And no matter what you do, you need to have a termination plan for whatever you plant. There is some yellow sweet clover now loose on the Kimberly Research Farm that may or may not have been planted by us. However, in my defense, I did tell the farm manager to get it taken care of earlier than they did. Perennial legumes are expensive seeds, so you need to know what they're going to do for you before you just go out and buy and plant those. And we still have not found a late season silver bullet to plant behind silage corn to give you grazable forage. All right, and the last slide here, just some pictures at the top there. These were cereals that we planted September 30th of 20 to try and see if we could get grazable forage. They established well. This picture was actually taken in March, and what you're seeing down the middle in the foreground here is cereal rye. On the far side was winter wheat, winter triticale, winter barley, and then spring wheat. In the spring, this cereal rye was going to head before all those others were even starting to elongate the stem. So that stuff can provide you some great early spring grazing, but you better have a plan to terminate it. In the center here is forage collards, and on the right hand side here, and just kind of show you what it looked like growing. In the bottom there is forage sorghum, which we think does better than grazing corn. And then by the harvester there, that is sun hemp, that tall plant. It is a hemp. It is stringy. It is tough. It wound around our harvester enough that we just quit playing with it. I don't really know where sun hemp fits, but it's kind of a fun plant and certainly a pretty flower on it. And so with that, Sean, I will end.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. That's a lot of good information, and really a lot of variety that you've experimented with. I'm really impressed with everything that you all have done there.
We will get all that written up at some point so that, you know, we have some local data to go to look at.
Excellent. Do we have any questions for Steve? Well,
Sean, this is Cooper Brossi. Can you hear me?
Yes, hear you loud and clear.
Hi, Sean. Steve, this is Cooper. Can you clarify, did you plant or not plant winter camelina?
We did not plant it.
Because of logistical reasons, or you couldn't find a seed source?
You know, I'll be honest with you, Cooper, it was one that we didn't even consider growing, and I can't tell you why. We used all the available space that we had at the farm with the species that we did grow. So that's really kind of there wasn't any great reason for growing it or not. We just didn't.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Cooper. looking at the chat here. Not seeing anything. Anybody else with questions for Steve?
Steve, can you share, and I don't know what the practice is, but I'd love to get a copy of those slides to pass on to our folks in the field.
Yeah, I can certainly do that. And like I say, my plan this winter and early spring is to write all of this up in a bulletin.
Great.
So we have that to get out and share. And like I say, you know, I know others have had some pretty good success with some of the things that we did not, but at least we've seen some of it grow now a little bit and feel like we can make some better recommendations. So when we get that written up, we'll make that available for sure.
Great, thanks.
Hey, Bass, we were wondering if we could get your slides as well.
Absolutely. So should I send those? Should we send those to you, Sean, or to Courtney to reshare with the group, or how do you want to do that?
Good question. So, you know, if you sent them to me or Courtney and Jed queried one of us, we'd be able to turn around and give them directly to him. I don't know. It's up to you as to how public you want your slides. I mean, all that stuff's information that can be gleaned from different places on the net, but it takes some work, right? So I can, you know, there's definitely some huge benefit in having it all in one spot. So however you wanted to do it. If you get them to us, I'll do whatever I can to get them out to Jed.
Excellent, will do.
Okay.
And this also is being recorded, so after it loads, I can get it uploaded to our YouTube page, our Idaho Soil Health YouTube page, and all the information and slides. Well, not the slides, but the video will have all the slides on it.
Then Courtney, we'll be adding timelines to the different topics, right? So after it's posted, we go back and add a timeline that's viewable so that you can look at that and you can go right to the stuff that you're interested in, rather than having to sit through the entire thing to get to the one part that you had the most questions on. So yeah, that's a good thing to mention too. I had a question for Steve, and I guess a little bit off the cover crop topic, but you had mentioned teff. You said that it didn't work well in a mix, but it grew well. And I'm curious about if you're hearing more about people growing alternative grains and what the market is for that, what the margin is for it, if there's more processing availability, anything along those lines is, I think, of great interest to folks.
Yeah, you know, I know of one grower down here who is growing some teff for grain. But other than that, I think there's some interest, but I'm certainly not seeing it, you know, as I'm out and about driving around. But it grew on that 1 year, say the summer before last, so that would have been 21. That was our best set of plots, and mainly because I went out and spent an inordinate number of hours hand weeding all of those plots so I could really see what they would do. But teff grew well. I didn't have to weed that teff a lot, and it regrew really well. I haven't put the forage yields for all those back together yet, but by itself, teff is a really nice annual, you know, summer forage. If for some reason a person doesn't want to grow a cereal grain, you know, in kind of an annual forage or some kind of a rescue forage situation or something like that, teff certainly grew well down here. And I know there's been a couple of other studies looking at teff on the research farm, and they've all done well.
Yeah, I just saw there was a note. from another Steve. I wonder if that's the famous Steve Schuyler, that said there was a good article in Ag Proud about of teff producers. So that's something interesting to follow on. Yeah, it's a good protein content, and something that I had never eaten teff until about a year ago, and was kind of surprised that just kind of cooked it kind of like cream of wheat. It was actually really good. So yeah.
It kind of, I will throw out maybe a topic for another 5 for 5. Because of the things that we've learned, that, you know, the weedy potential of some of these cover crops, we actually started doing a termination study, looking at different chemical controls. If some of these, if you're either trying to terminate them chemically or have some that get away, and really kind of some interesting results that you're not going to rely on glyphosate for some of these things if they get away. So that might be something Courtney, Albert might do that. Really interesting. I mean, you know, some of them, especially in our grain situations, we're kind of concerned about cereal rye, of course, and buckwheat is another one that is that buckwheat. That stuff is like a dandelion, man. You cut it and it does everything it can to produce a flower and produce a seed. Till honestly, I was so worried about it getting away on the research farm that year, I finally terminated it. Just I couldn't get out there and cut it fast enough before it would go back to flower. You know, like say once a week. So
wow, tough customer.
Yeah, but it emerges really fast, grows really fast, covers really well, competes with weeds pretty well. So I think it has its place, but anyway, I'll write all that stuff up at some point.
Excellent. All right. Well, I see we're at a little bit after 11. Does anybody have any general comments, questions, anything for the good of the group? I know Steve just mentioned a potential topic for an upcoming 5 for 5. Yeah, I'm very interested in hearing about anything else folks would like to talk on.
Hey, Steve, this is Lance Griff, and I was just wondering, this is kind of off topic, but did you do your trial again with cover crops in silage corn? And if you did, what's kind of your consensus with your preferred mix that you like in that scenario?
Yeah, hi Lance. We did again this year, and we switched mixes this year from the one that I'd done the last 2 years. This year we went with radish, turnip, annual ryegrass, and red clover. And it was a mix that we got from AgriSource. It's one that Jed, who has since left AgriSource, has kind of worked out. And the reason we went with that mix is because I wanted something that a producer could replicate pretty easy, you know, like if they wanted to go to an AgriSource or somewhere like that to get a mix. But it's just pretty hard to beat that radish and turnip and then some kind of grass, and the annual ryegrass has worked pretty well for that. And again, we had really good success. Scott Patrick tried it on a little trial on his place, and it didn't work quite as well for him. I think there were a couple of reasons for that, but I still think it has potential. And silage yields were the narrow 44s have been our highest yielding, and I can't tell you why, because I thought the twin 44s and I thought the twin 60s getting more sunlight down on both sides would be better, but I've got to think on that and figure out why that happened.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lance. Yeah, good question. Interesting stuff. Yeah, the corn trials are really interesting, Steve. All right. Any other questions? Any points for general discussion? Anything for the good of the group?
Jodi, are you still on the call? I do have a question about the big grant.
I think Jodi's gone.
Okay. one of the questions that come up, I don't know if anybody knows, one of the questions come up, why that particular crop, that, for example, alfalfa wasn't on that identified list of crops. And of course, there's a lot of alfalfa going down here. And that question come up a couple of times, and I didn't have a great answer. If it was Commodity Commission support or what the deal was that got particular crops on that list.
I don't know what the process was for the making the short list. Or I'd offer it up for you, but I don't know. And Courtney, I don't know if you heard anything in that regard.
No, I haven't, unfortunately.
All right, I'll just ask Jodi via email.
Okay. All right. Well, if there are no other questions or any points for general discussion, we can wrap this meeting. I really appreciate everybody joining, and especially the speakers. Thank you for taking your time to talk with us today. Great presentations. Yes, go ahead.
There's one
Courtney.
more question in the chat.
I
What species
see.
of buckwheat and what species of Phacelia were seeded?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I'm kind of thinking those were variety not stated. I bet I don't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and look. That's one of the other things when you get messing with these cover crops. Not only are there so many species, but there are several varieties within an individual species. So to say I grew one and had this exact result, and you're gonna have the same is not true.
Have other people had success with Phacelia? You said you saw it in Rupert, right?
Yeah, I know. Oh, come on. He has Agriterra seed over there. Anyway, he has grown it in individual plots and in mixes and had pretty good success with it. Luke Adams.
So maybe that's just an effect of the particular variety.
Well, it could be. And in all honesty, the area of the field that I put that my plots were in this year had a significant red root pigweed problem, and that pigweed just outgrew that Phacelia. I even tried to hand weed that Phacelia, and I couldn't keep up with the pigweed.
All right. Well, thanks again, Steve. We can close with that. I again thank everyone for your attendance today. Really appreciate you being here. And Courtney, do we have a date down on paper? I don't have it in front of me for the next one. I know that we had discussed that.
I think it's February 1st is the next one, and then April 5th. So we got
Okay.
a month or two.
All righty. So there you go. February 1st is the next one, and we'll be sending stuff out to everyone about that. So thanks again, and glad you were able to make it today.
Thanks, everybody.
See everybody.